Starting up. Shows that we are now live. So hello everyone. Welcome to week 9 of the Introduction to Agent-Based Modeling MOOC course. Hope everyone's doing well. So this week is we're covering units 6 and 7. Some of you may still be catching up on Unit 5 since it just got posted completely on Saturday. I apologize for that. Had some problems where some of the video quality or audio quality wasn't nearly as good as I thought it should have been, and so I had to re-record a bunch of lectures at the last minute. So sorry about that. But 6 should be up shortly, and 7, parts of 7 will be up this week for sure. I won't guarantee that all of 7 will be up, but parts of it will be at least. In regards to the content of what those different units are, Unit 5 was all about components of agent-based modeling. And so we went through things like what agents are, what the environment is, what interactions are, kind of try to set up some taxonomies for all those so we have some common terms to discuss things as we go forward. And then, talk about things like interfaces and scheduling, since that's an important concept to think about as you go forward. Hopefully people like the quick little headless behavior space experiment I went through. That I know that was quick and dirty, but that's actually something that a lot of people ask about, so I wanted to make sure I put that in there somewhere during the course and so that we could discuss it. Most of the time I'm just going to be working in the GUI, but I know that there definitely is a percentage of people who want to see the headless stuff, so I thought I'd talk about that real quick. It looks like we have quite a few people joining us on the comments today. I see them scrolling by there. It's great to have everyone here. Martin and Lon and Kevin and Gustavo and Eugene, all looking good. And Gustavo, of course, too, as well, right? So nice to see you all there. If you have any questions, feel free to answer them up. Jerry there as well, just joined in, I see. Please send me your questions as we go through. Getting back to the content unit 6 is going to be analyzing agent-based models. This is another aspect that people have talked a lot about. We're going to primarily be talking about how to create data with your model and then analyze it in different ways, right? And look at different results of the data. And this is, for some of you who have done a lot of modeling and simulation or a lot of statistical analysis, this may be a little introductory to you, but I wanted to make sure that we had a background to go with, right? And then I'm going to save actually for Unit 8 or Unit 9, the content on how to actually compare your results to empirical data, but we will get into that as well for those of you who are interested in that topic. I know there are some people who are interested in some of those topics more, right? So this one is primarily about how to analyze data that's generated directly from the agent-based model, as opposed to looking at data that you're trying to compare it to an empirical data set of some sort, right? So those are kind of two different goals, if you will, but they are related to each other. We'll talk about the other one at a later standpoint. Okay. So, and then after that, Unit 7 next week, well, at the end of this week, beginning of next week, we'll be talking about verification, validation, and replication, right? And so part of that will actually get into comparing your data to real data models, to real data sets from real world data, right? So I hope all that's going well. On the assignment front, hopefully everyone completed their first assignment. It was due last night at midnight Pacific time. I think we've now got the bugs worked out on the peer review setup, so let me know if that has been an issue for anyone. Going forward, we should have it set up. Part of this was, all of this was my fault in respect, because I misinterpreted when I could change the deadline by, basically I read what the deadline was, and so I apparently changed it after the original deadline. So sorry about that, but hopefully going forward we'll be able to get this all worked out. And we're only going to have one major other assignment that's peer reviewed, and that's going to be your final model, right? So I want you be thinking about that. And in fact, I'm going to post the assignment shortly, even though the deadline is not going to be till the last week of class or so, right? And the reason why I'm going to post it shortly is because I want you to have all the information you need about how to build that assignment put together, right? We will have it up and running in a short period of time, and hopefully you'll be able to get your comments in. Now, with the model design questionnaire, if everything worked according to plan, after you submitted after midnight last night Pacific time, you should have received 3 other, well, you won't receive them. You have to go back to the assignment. And when you go back to the assignment, you should see 3 other questionnaires that you need to review, right? So let me know if that's not happening. Like I said, this, in some ways, this is the very first attempt of using the peer review system on Complexity Explorer in a live class. So we, and apparently I kind of screwed it up a little bit when changing the deadline. So hopefully it works smoothly. If not, we'll see what we can do to address that situation. But let me know. Other than that, not much in terms of class announcements this week. Like I said, 5 and 6 will. 5 is up completely. 6 will be up during the course of this week. Actually, 6 will be up in the next couple of days. 7 parts of 7 should be up by the end of this week. So that's the go. Good. I see Hendrika says that the peer review is working perfectly. So hopefully that is going to work well. You have to get those peer reviews. By the way, you have to submit your own peer reviews by this coming Monday at midnight Pacific time, 11:59 Pacific time, right? To make sure that you get credit for your peer reviews as well. So you get credit in 2 ways for this assignment, right? You get credit for submitting the original document and then the grades you get from your peer reviewers, and then you get credit for the peer review you actually do, right? Yeah. Right now, unfortunately, in the first round of the first design questionnaire, I see a comment from Kevin about being able to submit qualitative comments, right? And it's very true. Unfortunately, I don't know why I didn't make sure this was there. As soon as I started to design the questionnaire, or the rubric for the grading, I realized this is a problem, that we need an empty blank text box so that you can fill in questions and fill in comments about the questionnaire so that you can be more explanative to the person that you're reviewing, right? And yes, and I apologize that that didn't get in time to make it live for this assignment. It will be live for the final assignment. So in the final assignment, you'll not only have these questions that say, so for those of you who haven't seen it, what you do is you see a question that says, did the student describe all the agents in the model? And then on the rubric says, 0, they didn't describe any of the agents. 1, they at least described 1 agent type. 2, they described all the agents in the model, right? And you have to just assess whether you should give them a 0, 1, or 2, right? And this is kind of a standard format for doing these. I try and make the questions as objective as possible, even though it's a qualitative exam. But usually what I would love to have is a blank empty box below each of those, so that you can then fill in any additional comments that won't really be part of the grade, but will give the student some feedback as to how they could improve what they're doing, right? That will be there, I've been told, for the final project. I need to double check with Gabby, who's our Complexity Explorer admin, but she's told me she is going to put that on the high priority list for this class. So for the final project, that will definitely be there. Unfortunately, it wasn't here in time for this. Yeah, and I don't really know of a good way, unfortunately, to get comments to people. I can't think of a way to do that. You're happy, feel free to post on the forums if you see something that you think a lot of people are, like if you're in your reviews, you think that there's something that's a question there, right, that you're seeing a lot of other people doing differently than you do, then please, please, please do post a question on the forum asking, about what you're seeing and see if we can start a conversation there. and that might be a good way to solve that problem, right? Yeah, unfortunately, I can't use Google Forms quite for this solution just because redirecting all these answers to everybody else might be difficult to do. And I'd have to think about if I could figure out a way to tie all those back to each other. It'd be a hard problem to solve. So anyways, we'll go forward as of right now without using these, but having the comments going back to the authors, but in the final project, we will have a way to make sure that happens. It'll be up and running shortly, okay? So that being said, there were, one of the things I did want to mention, because I had a couple of questions about it in email, not necessarily in the forums, but in email recently, was about the use of R, that some people are having some troubles with R. I haven't seen any consistent problems yet, but if you are having troubles with R, right, please let me know because we're going to use it quite a bit in Unit 6. And so we need to figure out what's going on. Before you start Unit 6, I highly recommend you go through Unit 4, especially the parts where we talk about how do you do the analysis of the model in R, right? Because that R script is very short. And so if you can't get that one running, then you might have more difficulty with Unit 6, so it might be a very frustrating experience because we actually use R extensively in Unit 6, okay? So that's one thing that came up in the mail that I had some generic questions about. Yeah, so that's basically where it's going. Now I have a couple questions from email I want to go through, right? Okay, so so there were definitely some questions. Again, the one other thing I would mention, there was a question that came in on email about why it shows a 0% of model review. Like I said, you won't get your full credit for the model review until, and I mentioned this I think last week in office hours, until the reviewers return the feedback to you. Once the reviewers return feedback to you, then you'll get full credit for model review, right? And we'll be able to go on from there. Until then, it's going to, unfortunately, just because the way Complexity Explorer shows the grade, it's going to show as a 0%. But as soon as all your feedbacks are in, it'll go up. And don't worry, we do have a contingency if people tend to, how can I put this? If some of the reviews don't get in on time, right? We will figure out a way to make sure that your scores get there. We'll either assign it to a new reviewer or we'll look at some averaging. There's a couple of different solutions we have in that space, right? Okay, let's see. Some people. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, so there's some complaints about having like 1 week deadlines, and if people could, like I said, I'm going to try and post these assignments earlier so that the final assignment much earlier, so there isn't just a single week deadline. That will hopefully alleviate some of those issues. In the future, right, once we rerun the course, we'll definitely make sure they're longer than that. Some of this has been that with the peer review stuff coming on just now, that makes it difficult. That made it difficult to get it up and running much earlier than this. Okay, and then we had a lively discussion in the forums about attributes versus parameters versus variables, right? So there was a conversation that was going on posted by Miguel Pizania about what are attributes, what are parameters, and what's our variables. And for those of you who haven't looked in the forums, I responded that this can be quite confusing because these terms are often used interchangeably, right? Variable, and partially they're used interchangeably because at times they are exact synonyms of each other, right? So an attribute is almost always a variable and a parameter is almost always a variable, right? An attribute is usually used to describe a particular property of an agent or an entity. A parameter is usually used to describe a particular property of a model, but that often can be confusing at times for some people, right? And in fact, especially since parameters can also be, you can think of parameters of submodels. Those submodels might be attached to agents, and so therefore you could have a parameter of a submodel that is an attribute of an agent, right? And I don't want to spend too much time getting caught up in kind of the semantic differences there. But essentially, the important thing to remember, and I'm never going to ask you specifically on any of the tests or anything like that, like what's an attribute versus a parameter or something like that. The important distinction to remember in this case, or the distinction that I often try and keep here, is that a variable is just a generic term for anything that can change within a model, right? A parameter is a term that's often attached to a process of some sort, right? For instance, a model or a submodel or something like that. Whereas an attribute, at least in the agent-based modeling world, is often attached to an entity, a thing, right? Like an object of some sort, right? But again, 99% of the time, you can actually figure out what the person meant when they're using one of those terms by the context in which they're using it, right? So I wouldn't worry too much along those lines, right? Gustavo was saying he had some issues with that tutorial, and he even tried reinstalling. One issue that did come up quite a bit, and this is something that you should check in the original thing. If you're having trouble with R, the code snippet that I uploaded was for my particular implementation of the model. So if you run my implementation of the model and get the results that I got, you also have to, I should say, and you change the path name in the file because it's pointing to my computer right now. You'd have to change it to whatever your computer directory is. It should work. The problem that people run into is if they write their own version of the model while watching my version on the videos, and then try and use the R code, it should still work, except for one thing. The columns in the output file from behavior space may be in the wrong order. They may be in a different order because it depends upon how you put your parameters into your model. That affects the order in which the columns get generated by behavior space, right? And so as a result of that, there's one line of code. Here, I'll show it to you guys real quick. There's a line of code that deals with the column names, renaming the column names, just to make it easy, because otherwise it would be even harder to deal with. And if that line of code doesn't match your columns, that can be a problem. So let me take you through this real quick. This is a good thing to do for this class. So okay. So let me see. I got to add a couple of windows to here. So window capture. Let's do this for our code. Okay. Okay. So now you should be able to see the R code up there. Let me set one up for the R main window too. Okay. Okay. So let me move those around a little bit. Okay. So now you should be able to see the R screen up there. And what I'm talking about is, first of all, the first thing you need to do to make this code work, I'll blow it up a little bit. Let me make the R code the higher one so it's up there. Okay, good. Okay, so let me turn off my camera for a second while we're doing this. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice is that there's this line at the top where I specify what where the file is, right? And so you're going to need to change this piece of the code. Actually, you're going to need to change, depending upon the file name, you're going to need to change all of this code, right? So you're going to need to change it to whatever the file name that was the output of the behavior space file that you had, right? And so if I load up, and let me pull up one more window to show you, right? So if I load up NetLogo, by the way, it's going to start buffering a little on me. You might get a little choppy if you're watching the live stream because I'm loading up a bunch of other software, which always slows down the stream a bit. So dash NetLogo, okay. Okay. So actually, let's see, run. Okay, let me capture this window and show it to you. No, that's not the one I want. There we go. Okay. So when you are running the experiment, right, you will get a window that looks like this at some point, right? And this window allows you to specify the file name that you're dumping the results of the experiment into, right? And that is the file name that you need to capture to put into NetLogo. So in my particular case, I was saving it to the desktop, right? And so it's /user/wran/desktop, but you have to find out where it is on your computer, right? And at that point, you get that file, that full path and file name, and then you need to copy that over into here, or into the R code, right? So that needs to then go into the R code right here, right? Okay. So that's one thing that people sometimes have a trouble with, right? Is that they're trying to access the file that I already had, right? That could be a problem. Then the other problem they might have is that this command, the col names command, isn't working, right? And it's not obvious because what's going to happen is you're going to let it run and it's going to try and do the other stuff and it's going to have troubles at the other points. It's going to run the col names command, but because the columns don't match up in the same order, that's going to be a problem. So one thing you can do is once you've read in the data, let me find a copy of this data actually because I don't have it. Okay, let me just worry about it real quick. It won't take that long. Okay, desktop. Okay. Okay. Oh, actually, screwed that up. I hit abort rather than hit turn off the graphs. Sorry about that. I'm running it here. You can't see anything. Okay, but now it's done. Okay. So I can load up this data, right? And on 7, right? Experiment social influence, experiment dash table should be same. Now I'm having trouble loading the file. Oh, this is user/w. What the heck? Where? User/wran/desktop model 7. Oh, okay. I actually changed the name of my NetLogo model. So because I want to save off the model 7 versus the model 7 with the experiment. So that's the problem, right? So I got to change my R script a little bit just to point to the right R file. So now you should see it loaded. It finally was able to load the data in correctly, right? If you look at this text, I'm blowing up a little bit down here, right? But here's the problem, right? So it could be that the column names are different in this data than they are in the data I just read in. So one thing you can do is you can do head data, like this, head data. Let me move that one up, right? And that will let you see the actual columns in order. And then you can kind of compare these two to each other. So you can see that it's run, social influence, social, weight, influential weight, number ages, network, fraction, influential, broadcast, density, step, count Charles with adopted, count regulars with regular adoptions, count influentials with influential adoptions, right? So in this case, I know that the column names match up, but it could be that they don't match up, and that could happen because just the way you create the behavior space experiment. If you added the parameters in different orders and things like that, it'll cause that to happen. So those are the two things I would check if you're having troubles with the tutorial. I would check that you make sure that the data, that the path to the directory is right, and that the column names are in the right order. Okay. So let me turn these off just so I can go back to it. And let me double check to make sure there aren't any follow-ups to that before I go forward. Okay, cool. Looks good. Okay. So that was one question that people had troubles with. Hopefully that helps. If you have any other issues, I did have one other person write in, but we haven't been able to figure out exactly what's going on with a while. Yes. So is our case sensitive? It depends is the best answer. I think most of the time it is. There are certain aspects of it that aren't, but there are certain aspects that are. Essentially, in all cases, yeah, you should basically assume that it is case sensitive. A lot of essentially what it comes down to is a lot of the ways it matches up column names is case sensitive. But some of the other aspects, like some of the commands, might not be case sensitive. I would treat it as if it was case sensitive, essentially, in most cases. That's probably the easiest way to deal with it. There are parts of it that aren't. Basically, if it's trying to match a literal, like one of the column names or something like that, it's going to be case sensitive. If it's not matching a literal, I believe it's not case sensitive, but I'm actually not an expert on that, so someone else can correct me if I'm wrong about that. So thanks, Kevin, for the question, but yeah, I think you should assume that it's essentially operating as if it was case sensitive. Okay. Yeah, and there are a bunch of comments about having having a place to respond to the uploading, right? Yeah, all good. Okay. Okay, so I think, yeah. Oh, there is, and this is something that came up on the forums, and I actually noticed as well. We're looking into it right now. For some reason, right now, our course and I think the nonlinear dynamics course, the forums are somehow interrelated, and so at times, by the way, you may search for something on the forums, or you may be getting notifications about the other courses forums, and they're looking into that right now. They're trying to address that, so not sure exactly what's going on with that right now, as of right now, but hopefully we'll have that fixed soon. Might be something to do with moods, which is not something that we actually control, so that might be problematic, but hopefully we can get it resolved. Okay. Okay, and then there's a couple other bigger coding questions. So I think I've gone through all the smaller questions, right? And at this point, I was going to try and look through one of the coding questions that people have been having. But if you have any additional questions, I haven't looked at Twitter yet today. But if you have any additional questions, please let me know at this point. Okay, I think I've gone through all the ones that are quick for me to cover over. So apparently my tweet deck isn't running, so that could take a second. But yeah, okay. So I have a question here from. Actually, I don't know who it's from because the name is in Cyrillic, and I apologize, but I don't read Cyrillic. But it's from someone, and I will bring it up. I can at least read the question. They didn't list their name in the answer. So the question is, I've encountered a problem while trying to code my model. The problem is that one agent, breed, employee, performs an action under the go procedure, but in the process, some parameter of another agent, breed, innovator has to be changed. But as far as I know, you can't write in NetLogo ask employees to ask innovators to. Please help me find a solution. I've attached my code. The problem is in search for startup procedure. I tried to make employees join startups, innovator agents, but only if their number is less than 4. Actually, you should be able to do this. You can do ask employees, ask innovators. That's definitely something you could do. So let's take a look at this and see if we can figure out what's going on exactly. So removing my R windows, since we don't need those anymore. Let's bring up the NetLogo window. So here it is. I'll make it a little bit bigger for you guys. Okay, and I'll turn myself off to save some of the choppiness, hopefully. Okay, so so here we have his their code. I don't know. It could be male or female. Not sure. But the code seems to indicate. Oh, let me blow it up. Okay. Oh, it's Eugene's code. Okay, sorry, Eugene. I apologize for not being able to read the name. But anyways, so so the code is in the search for startup problem. So the search for startup code. So I guess the idea is generally you have a bunch of employees sitting around and they are trying to find a company to work for. And let me read the detail again. If their number is less than, so they want to join a startup that has less than 4 employees already, is my understanding of what you're trying to do. Okay, so let's look into that. We could probably do that. So here we have to search for startup. Ask employees if idle equals to true. I'm assuming that means that they are not currently employed. If random float 1 is less than probability of finding, so that means there's some probability that they find a innovator, then create link with one of innovators with startup size less than startup max size, set idle false. So your problem is that you can't, first of all, you can't check, you're worried that you can't check. Let me make this a little bigger so it should help things a little bit. Let's see if that works. Okay. First of all, your problem is that you can't check to see if the innovators already have 4 employees. Well, this actually is doing that, right? Because it's saying if the startup size is less than startup max size. But I guess the other problem is that when you're adding them, you're not increasing the startup size. So you're not setting the startup size to be more than 1 at this point, right? Okay. Because currently the only other place, so one way I would do this is I would look to see where startup size is mentioned, right? It's mentioned here in the setup code where they are setting the startup size equal to the number of link neighbors. And then it's mentioned here when they're searching for the startup, but it's not mentioned there, right? Where they're actually setting up, and it's mentioned here where it's defined, right? Okay. So that's the problem, is you need to increment the startup size. I think that's what your problem you're running into, Eugene, is, isn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong about that one, but that looks to be what you need to do, right? And now the problem is that you're creating a link with one of the innovators with the startup size less than startup max size, but you don't know which innovator that is, right? And so you don't know how to increment that innovator's setup. So what I tend to do here, so the problem when you use create link with, the only thing you have access to is the link. You don't have access to the thing at the other end. So what I try and do usually is I find a entity that has that matches the thing I want to link to. I create a local variable for that entity, and then I create a link with that local variable. And what that lets me do is also address the thing at the other end, right? So let me show you what I mean by that. That was kind of an obtuse way of describing it. But I'm going to take your code here where you're creating the link with, I'm going to copy it up to the previous line. And I'm going to say let target startup be one of innovators with startup size less than that startup max size, right? This is going to let me identify which innovator I'm connecting to, right? Because now I have a local scoped variable that defines it to be the target startup, right? I then can create a link with the target startup. And then I can ask the target startup to set its startup size to startup size plus 1, right? So yes, you can have one agent type ask another agent type to do something, right? But in your particular case, it's not just an agent type that you want to change. You don't want to change the whole agent type. You want to change a particular agent. You want to change the agent this one joined, right? So that solves your intermediate problem. Let's see what you've got here, right? So let's look at the rest of your code just to make sure this is running correctly. So set default shape innovators and employees to person. That all makes sense, right? We want them to look like people. Create innovators equal to number of innovators. Set their color to blue. Set them in a random place. They have an idea power. I like that. That's kind of a cool notion. They just have a power of their idea, right? You then have a number of employees. Some of them have a random competence, right? Makes sense. Then you have a bunch of innovators. You have them create links with 2 employees that have idle equal to true, and then have their increment their startup size. One other thing you might want to do, actually, just early on, Net logo does default to setting all variables to 0, but I like to make it explicit when I'm going to do comparisons. So I would definitely set the startup size to 0 when you create the innovators to begin with, so that all the other innovators, so that they then increment exactly. I guess technically this is going to override it, so you don't have to do that, but I just like to make sure that it's being updated along the way as well, just in case I were to ever put some code in between these two that were to check on the startup size. And then you're just going to lay them out. Okay. Now to go, you create new agents. So since this code is repeated, by the way, I mean, it's just the only difference is born innovators and born employees. One thing you might want to think about doing is what we call encapsulating this code, like creating a new method for this code, right? So you could, for instance, have to create or to set up, because create innovators is a reserved word, right? To set up innovator, right? And in this, you can just put the code you're going to put in the ask command here, right? And to set up employee, and put that code in there, right? And the nice thing is that since you're repeating this, so then you can just say set up innovator, set up employee. Since this is going to be the same code, I believe, that is up here, it's a little bit different. Well, you changed a couple things. Let's go random white core, idea power. What was different? It's just because I added the set startup size, right? Okay, so we can fix that. Okay, set up innovator. Right. Set startup size 0. Shall be working. Yeah, and then this can be set up employee. And the reason why I highly recommend doing that, whenever you have a piece of code that's repeated into multiple places, I almost always recommend turning it into a method as soon as it's in 2 places. And the reason why is because what you don't want to have happen, right, is you don't want to have you don't want to go to modify one particular part of your code and then forget to modify the other part, right? So it's very important, I think, to try whenever possible to create a method whenever you have the same piece of code repeated twice, because it really helps you when you're talking about the modularity of the code, right? Eugene's saying he's sorry the code is very raw. No, this is great, actually. This is perfect because it helps me. This is not something that's in any of the video lectures anywhere, right? And so that it helps me explain why I often do the things I do, and it gives me an example and a chance to do that. So no, don't apologize. I think this is fantastic. I think the code looks great. I'm actually really impressed by what you've done so far. So it looks good. Okay, let's go back to the code. So yes, the innovators. So that some of the innovators have a startup, right? Create new agents is the next piece of code. Search for startup, right? They will then search the startup. They'll then ask the targets to set their startup size +1. There's one other thing I was thinking. I want to make sure it's happening. No, this should be fine. I think at this point it should work. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other stuff you need to add to the model. I see you have some stubs in here for distributing profit and leaving startup, right? But I think this should do everything we want it to do. And let's see. I mean, because the one thing, let's make this a forever button for a second. Yeah, okay. So what your problem was before was that some of the startups were having more than 4 people, and I don't think that's the case. One way we can check real quick is we can say, ask innovators with count linked neighbors greater than startup max size. Actually, you don't even have to ask them. We just have to print innovators with count linked neighbors regardless. And as you can see, that agent set contains 0 turtles, right? Oh, you can't see that code. Hold on 1 second. Let me pull that up. No. There we go. Okay. So now you should be able to see the code that I just wrote, which is that show innovators with count linked neighbors greater than startup max size, and it shows that the agent set has a 0 size, and so as a result of that, we know that none of the innovators have more than that max size, right? In fact, one thing we could do that's kind of similar to that is we could just have count size. We could just print count linked neighbors of innovators. As you can see, all the innovators have exactly 4 neighbors. So that seems to be working correctly. Okay. Why is this? It seems like it's not showing up on the stream yet. Hopefully, when I'm typing there, hopefully it's just probably having a problem with the buffering, but it should show up quickly. Oh, maybe I'm not actually playing the stream. That might do it too. Okay. So anyway, so that should work pretty well. So hopefully that helps you, Eugene. Yeah. Okay, there it goes. Now it's working. Okay. So that should help you out quite a bit. I'll send you a copy of this code, Eugene. If you don't mind, I'll also post it to the forum. But I'll only do that if you give me permission to. So that other people can also see what we did during the office hours. Because it's your code in this case rather than code that I wrote from scratch. My rule of thumb is always I only do that once I've gotten permission to post it. But I will send you a copy of it and I'll ask you for permission. Okay? So, cool. Hope that helps. And I think that's about it for today. That should cover all the questions we have, right? If anyone else has any questions, let me know. And we will hopefully address them next week. So next week, week 10, same time, same place. Tuesday at 11 a.m. and the URL no longer changes, right? Because of the fact that we're just using my standard live stream. The scheduled live streams don't seem to be working for me very well. That could be just because the one time I tried it was in the hotel room, but this seems to work out okay. So it's just youtube.com/c/BillRand/live. That should always find it. So hope everyone has a good week. Have fun with Unit 5, and Unit 6 should be posted shortly. And we'll go from there. And I will get that, per the request, I'll get the assignment for the final assignment up as soon as possible so that we can make sure that people have plenty of time to get it done before the end of the course. Okay. Um, oh, and yeah. So just to recap from the beginning. Unit 5's up completely. Unit 6 will be up shortly. Unit 7, we'll see parts of it. Please, please, please complete your peer review assignments. They're due by next Monday at midnight. That should handle it. So the final assignment, the model assignment, will go live sometime in the near future. And the due date will probably be closer towards the end of October with a peer review at the end of October, right? So that will be the plan as to what to do there, okay? So thanks, everyone, and I will see you all in about a week.